The joy of serving on boards in 5 continents. Welcome to the Better Boards podcast series, the podcast for chairs, CEOs, non-executive directors, company secretaries and their advisors. Every episode is filled with practical insights and learnings from those inside boardrooms. We discuss what really matters and highlight actionable steps you can take to enhance the performance of your board or enhance your career. This episode is quite a unique one, which challenges some wisdom that you can only serve in one country where you know the culture very well, where you know the corporate governance code very well, and in an industry you know very well. I talk with someone who has served on boards in 5 continents. He counted the number of countries he worked in and served on boards, and the number stands currently at 19. So really quite impressive. I think this episode is really inspiring and it challenges some wisdom about how you can operate and what can you accept. I'm delighted to talk with Christof Kutscher. Christof, thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
It's a pleasure. Good morning, Sabine.
Christof, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because I've never met anyone who served on so many different boards than you. Most board members I meet have served on boards in 1, 2, or maybe 3 countries, and only a small number of related industries. And these board members always argue with me that it's essential to understand a country's legal context, the culture, and you did something entirely different. Tell us a little bit about this. How come that you serve on 5 continents throughout your career? Amazing.
Well, I didn't start on 5 continents. I started on 1 continent, and that was Europe. And I started in 1 country, and that was Switzerland. My board career and start with 5 continents. And I think, yes, it is challenging, but also intellectually very stimulating to serve on boards in different countries, cultures. But I think the difference between boards of listed companies and private companies, family-owned companies and subsidiaries are probably bigger than the difference between countries. So I would not emphasize the country as the most important distinction how boards operate, really. So yes, it has been stimulating and I enjoyed being on boards in so many countries, but I probably find the challenge bigger between the family enterprise where you have a patriarch who founded the company, who is the majority owner of the company, is founder, chairman, CEO, possibly chief financial officer and head of HR in one person, than a listed company between, let's say, Korea and Germany. That's probably more similar than the other dimension.
And what have you done to really understand this legal context, the differences in corporate governance codes?
First, I started in European countries where differences exist but are less big. Second point is, that was very important for me, in between 2 jobs, did the NACD training in the United States, the National Association of Corporate Directors. And I must say this was very important for myself because I got a very good basic training in what the duties of a board are, what the liabilities of a director are, and how boards operate, listening to very experienced people in that type of trade. While there are plenty of differences between the countries, I think the basic idea of what a board is about is rather similar. And so this very solid background helped me a lot to operate then on different continents and in very different types.
There are so many programs also here in the UK where I'm sitting, and a lot of aspiring board members really struggle to get a seat on the board, even if they had good careers. How have you found your roles in all these different countries? How have you done that?
Well, first, there were a couple of boards I got into ex officio, I would say. I was senior manager in a very large global bank for 17 years for that bank. And we operated in many countries. And so I had to join the country boards in various European countries initially, then also outside Europe, in Asia Pacific, and then of course also in quite a few joint ventures we had. That was a starting point, gave you very good training for myself and gave me a lot of cultural experience to operate in different countries. You can imagine there are countries with cultures which are very hierarchical, for example. And then you have countries which are more egalitarian, I would call it, in their approach. And of course, that reflects a lot in how boards operate in these different countries. So that was my basic training, I would say. And I learned a lot, and I did that for more than 10 years. And then other opportunities came up. They came through various sources. One is my kind of personal network. I got on the board of a Swedish DN company many years ago because I met the founder and of the brain behind the company. And we got along very well, and he needed a board member, so I joined. So it had nothing to do with headhunters or kind of official introductions. And then I decided at a relatively young age to quit my career. I was in a very senior position. I made good money. I had worked on various continents. And when I left this company after 17 years, of course, quite a lot of journalists popped up and asked me, what are you going to do next? Are you going to become CEO of XYZ? And I said, no, I'm not looking for a job. I've been for 20 plus years in this business. I know it very well. So I'm not looking for a job. And of course, what happened, very shortly after, headhunters called and said, okay, Christof, do you really mean that? And I said, yes, I mean it. But then the idea came up to join very significant boards. And I was immediately asked to become chair of a very large board. And I joined that. And so that was, I had been on many boards, but these were mainly subsidiaries or joint ventures of the company I worked for. And then suddenly I took that role, and I got one role in Korea and one in France at the same time. And quite interesting combination. And I think that was a lot of learning for me. But I had served on boards in both countries before, but not independent companies. And so that was a good start. And yes, I think if you don't do that in a bad way, the networking starts. And from that one, I never had to look for something. Things always came to me. And I think then it's network. And you hopefully develop a reputation that you don't steal the money and don't destroy the company and don't do harm. And I think I have that reputation that I don't steal the money and I and can help. And I've learned to operate in very different cultures. So, I also, my job, I worked in many different countries in Europe and quite a few countries. In Asia, I lived in Hong Kong, in Tokyo. And so I've seen a lot of different cultures, how they operate. That helps enormously when you then join boards in any of these countries and even outside these countries, because the openness to understand other cultures is growing with experience.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned networking, and I know that a lot of aspiring board members or board members who try to grow their portfolio are always challenged by how do you network? Can you maybe give some tips in which circles did you move, or how did you initiate this networking?
I think it's important to build trust with people and to deliver more than people ask for. And don't ask first for a lot of things and then try to deliver, but the other way around. Boards are very much trust-driven, and having a proper reputation and no dangerous experience in your CV is very helpful. And then it works. And of course, yes, I still receive invitations through headhunters who also have heard that I typically don't steal the money. And I'm culturally adaptable. And of course, that helps as well. And so I listen, and sometimes I think tell them right away that this doesn't work for me. Either it's a conflict of interest, or I believe something is wrong in the setup of the board, which is so wrong that as a board member, I will not be able to operate properly and to contribute properly.
I mean, you indicated in our prep conversation really that you apply really quite strict criteria before even having a closer look and wasting time on a role where you already have a feeling that you don't take it. And you said something that I found really interesting. You said something that you never wanted to be a token board member. Can you explore this a little bit?
Because different companies have different strategies to hire board members or to recruit. And initially I was inexperienced and probably didn't ask the right question at the beginning. I ended up sometimes in roles where I found out that I don't feel comfortable. And I call this not token, I call this decoration. Some companies like to have people with good reputation and good names in the industry or in their own career, but don't see the board in its full scope as delivering or being accountable for strategy, CEO selection, risk compliance, and all the other regulatory requirements. They are done by the head of legal and prepared for the board. They don't expect the board to ask too many questions on those ones. And they believe they can develop a strategy and the board is taking it off. That's not me. Now, you can have these people. In the past, they smoked probably cigars. I don't smoke. I've never smoked. It was not my thing. Yeah, I love the deep dive to understand the company, the industry, the strategy, the key people in the company, the risk of the company, and then have a very sophisticated debate with other board members, with senior management to see how we can support the company. That's, for me, intellectually highly stimulating. And I believe if we have such board compositions, the board can really add value. And if you allow me one other side comment. Most companies have a board of directors, but some companies also have an advisory board. And I must say, sometimes the advisory boards are more interesting than the formal board, the board of directors. Why? The board of directors very often has a highly political component, and it's always asking questions about how things can be implemented in a company. In advisory boards, you typically have really deep experts who know industry, who have very good experience as CEOs in other companies. And the debate is more open because the debate is about creating ideas and creating opinions, what can be done and implemented. And the board has different functions and different types of tasks to do. And I had the pleasure to be on some outstanding advisory boards where people didn't have necessarily the board experience you would expect from a board of director, but where you had more the intellectual capability to analyze and so on. It might be an advice to aspiring directors also to look at the advisory board initially, where they can bring in more of their experience from the industry they come from. Here, one can add serious value to a company. And of course, if you have served on good advisory boards, you can also go on board of directors, and people will see sometimes the one or the other fits more your personality.
Amazing. Yeah, no, that's a very good tip. Thank you so much for that, Christof, because I know a lot of our listeners look exactly for such tips.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've probably seen it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah. Before we end on a high note, what good looks like, can you share maybe early warning signs before a board is really derailing, before it gets really ugly?
Well, the composition of a board is key. I always say it's the greatest joy and pleasure in life to work with human beings, but it can be also the most difficult and terrible thing on the planet. Yeah. So the question is always how to build a functioning group of people. They can have all kind of different backgrounds, and probably should have all kind of different backgrounds. It should be diverse, board diverse in a sense, which is much broader than gender. So it's from their shapers as personalities, their questioners as personalities. You need to have really this multidimensional diversity on a board. That is a key success factor when I see a board which is rather one-dimensional in any of these dimensions. It's bound for accident. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Second is age. I had the great opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, I quit my career role when I was 53, and I then moved into various board roles. And I really believe the immediate move from one side to the other side is helpful, and people need to have recent experience in business itself, managing people. The behavior of millennials is different than the behavior of baby boomers. And it is very important that there are also board members from, say, different generations. People who have seen the world, who have experience, sure, but have not been for 10 years or 15 years out of an operational role. And because then you listen to old wisdoms very often and out of touch with the current world. So refreshing your board is extremely important, getting also a mix of experience. And when people decide to move into a board career, when you are 65 and have done worked for your life in various companies or even as CEO or very senior roles, I believe your added value is shrinking relatively quickly. And so I think the opportunity, and I took that path, was very helpful that I left the operational path relatively early, and so had really deep hands-on experience, also working with different generations of people who were already in senior positions at that level, and to understand the change of society better and what you need to do to manage a company successfully. So age distribution is important, and seniority, yes, but connectivity with life as it is today is as important.
So how do you manage now?
I left my career, but then 4 years ago, I was approached by an Australian company who wanted to set up a new business in the space of asset management, but related to carbon credits and natural capital. This is a completely new area, and I brought two companies together to build a joint venture. That was before COVID, and I was very clear from the beginning that I should be chairman of the board, because I helped to develop the idea. I brought the different partners together, and then we didn't have a CEO. And how do you recruit a CEO at the beginning of COVID when you cannot even interview the people in person? So everybody looked around, and some looked at me, and so I took the role and became also CEO of that company. So I managed that company for 4 years, and we developed a very nice business. I quit a year ago. I'm still very friendly and related to the company, but I worked full-time, or 150%, I would say, was creating a company. At the beginning of COVID was a very challenging thing. So I worked with this one. Again, I had a lot of exposure with people who were 25 and 30, who had great degrees from Imperial College and would tell me which schools. And to build a new business was very young average age. And we did successful business together. So I was back in business for 3 or 4 years. And that was also a nice catch up with me to see again what has changed, how corporate culture has changed, how younger generations shape businesses, how do you operate them, how do you keep them happy, and so on. So I had a wonderful experience as a refresher, so to say, on how executive life works. And then I quit in May last year, and of course now I'm not in an executive role. But believe it or not, I'm in the process of thinking about starting a new business again.
That's a very unique path you took. Amazing experiences, Christof. I'm sure our listeners will feel inspired by listening to this. Sadly, we have to come to an end. I'm looking at our clock here. And at the end, I always ask the challenging question, what are the 3 things our listeners should really take away from this podcast?
And avoid boards where you have people who put their ego so high that the board cannot operate. I've seen boards where we have individuals, very strong people, incredibly smart and experienced, but their ego was in their way to help the company. And if you are on such a board, it's misery. So I wouldn't want that. It does not work. It doesn't help. And make sure what the board is doing, that it's doing what it's supposed to do. And I mentioned earlier, it's about strategy, setting, organization of senior management, it's about risk management and liabilities. So all the regulatory stuff. And it is really doing that because you can have the best directors insurance on the planet. If you don't do that properly, you will run into trouble. So I think I see that the company is doing this. And of course, decide after you are on the board for 6 months or so, if you can really contribute to the board. You rather get out early than wasting your time in something where your know-how is not really in demand, and rather short experience, but move quickly. I think the worst is when you may stay 2.5 years and then see finally that you cannot contribute. So I think taking the decision, this is right for me or wrong for me, very quickly. And if you are smart, you will find another board role and have just added 1 set of experience to your CV.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christof. Thank you so much for contributing to the Better Boards podcast series.
Thank you, Sabine. It was a pleasure to discuss with you.
This podcast episode is part of the Better Boards podcast series, brought to you by Better Boards, a provider of board evaluation solutions. Get in touch if you would like to hear more about our work, or if you would like to see a demo of our innovative board evaluation platform clients can use for their internal or as part of a fully facilitated external board evaluation. We also work with professional service providers who use our software to offer their services to their clients. We at Better Boards are always delighted to hear from you. You can best reach us at info@better-boards.com. Thank you for listening and looking forward to talking with you.